This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. With Congress back in session and an election coming up, journalist Chuck McCutcheon is here to interpret political euphemisms, explaining why calling someone my good friend is usually a lie. The author of a new book about political accountability says the conviction of former Virginia Governor Bob McDonnell is an example of a new kind of corruption, violation of the public trust. And Bill Press talks with journalist Christina Bellantoni about Democratic prospects for retaining the Senate. Are you tired of Tea Party Republicans and Rush Limbaugh dominating the airwaves? Do you want the facts you won't get on Fox or even on CNN? Then stay tuned. Our sponsor, 21st Century Democrats, works hard to get everyday Democrats involved in returning our party to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Sit back and listen, then stand up and fight. And follow 21st Century Democrats on Facebook for all the latest progressive news. We're glad you can join us. Political reporter Chuck McCutcheon has written a dictionary of Washington euphemisms, or dog whistles as he calls them, to help us understand the kabuki theater of Congress and the election campaigns. And we say hello to Chuck McCutcheon. He's a Washington journalist who has written, co-written, or edited 7 books. The subjects include nuclear waste, climate change, Congress, and politics. He is co-author with David Mark of a forthcoming book called Dog Whistles, Walkbacks, and Washington Handshakes, Decoding the Jargon, Slang, and Bluster of American Political Speech. Chuck McCutcheon, thanks so much for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org.
Oh, thanks for having me.
This book looks like fun, and I'm looking forward to it. We'll start with the obvious, I guess, here. The title of the book that you wrote with David Mark. What are dog whistles, walkbacks, and Washington handshakes?
Well, dog whistles are words that are considered, subtle political code that only certain subgroups will understand. Everybody uses it, but the example we use in the book is George W. Bush, in some speeches, would employ the phrase wonder-working power, which comes from a hymn that's familiar to evangelical Christians. A walkback is what a politician is often forced to do whenever he or she says something that causes an uproar. And a Washington handshake is when someone greets you and then immediately looks over your shoulder to see if there's anybody who's more important in the room, kind of like the character Dan would on the show Veep.
Uh-huh. Now, you are a journalist, as I mentioned at the top, former newspaper reporter. Doesn't your profession contribute mightily to the confusion by adopting the language of politicians whose very lifeblood is euphemism?
Yes, it often does, unfortunately. It's one of the things that's made words you hear a lot like endgame and kabuki theater become so cliched. But I do see some of the better Washington journalists are cutting through this language and pointing out abuses. The website Slate does it quite often, and the Wall Street Journal's language columnist Ben Zimmer will take on deal with political words. PolitiFact will sometimes point them out as well. And so I like to think that there's been a counter effort to sort of cut through the euphemism, use of euphemisms.
Yeah. Well, and of course, we all do it, and we see it in other professions as well. I mean, I think of sports. When I think of euphemisms, I really think of sports and sports broadcasters.
Right.
But
right.
Gosh.
And you could do an entire book just on how sports phrases and cliches have migrated into the world of politics.
Right. Well, that's just it. I mean, and then all of a sudden you look at some of the political jargon and you think, well, wait a minute, I think I heard that in a game last week.
Exactly.
Is it even possible for politicians and Washington insiders to speak the language that the rest of America speaks? I mean, could we get better leaders that way, or is it kind of necessary to be ambiguous to get anything done?
Well, I think a certain amount of euphemism is always going to persist. I mean, you're never going to hear a politician come out of a meeting with someone and say, "Yeah, that was really bitter and nasty," when they can, be more polite and say it was cordial, or there was a free and frank discussion of views. But it would obviously be a lot nicer if they didn't resort to so much obfuscation. I know that Congressman Bruce Braley of Iowa, who's now running for the Senate, has been on a crusade for years to get government agencies to write their materials in clear and concise English. But as we say in the book, slang in politics, just like in everywhere else, creates these sort of in-groups and out-groups and a sense of belonging to something. and obviously belonging to something is obviously especially big deal here in Washington.
You know, if we could just get the IRS to write in plain language, I would be fine with that. You know, every other group, you just go ahead and do what you want. But if we could just get just so somebody can understand something beyond the easy form. We're speaking with Chuck McCutcheon, Washington journalist, and he is co-author with a forthcoming book, along with David Mark, of Dog Whistles, Walkbacks, and Washington Handshakes, Decoding the Jargon, Slang, and Bluster of American Political Speech. One of the things people who watch C-SPAN might not understand is why vicious congressional debate is always directed at my good friend or the distinguished senator. Why is that? I mean, is this sort of a leftover from our British heritage, or?
Mm-hmm. It's probably descended from the British Parliament, where, you know, they've spent hundreds of years referring to colleagues as the right honorable gentleman. You know, and it's a thinly veiled attempt at decorum, but, you know, given how polarized Congress has become, you know, it's become laughingly ironic. You know, the phrase "my good friend," of all the phrases in our book, it's the one that most people we interviewed said annoyed them the most by far. We quote Congressman Gene Green of Texas as jokingly saying that when he first came to Capitol Hill that, you know, he said, people used to tell me, when someone refers to you as my good friend, look behind you.
Well, I imagine there's a lot of that with a lot of different sayings in the political world.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I mean, there's this polite veneer that, as I said, increasingly, as things have become more combative over time, you know, it's just the veneer has kind of worn off, and it's just all too readily apparent that someone really does not consider someone their good friend, or that they don't see them as a distinguished colleague, or something like that.
Were there any, in the process of writing the book with David, did you run into things and say, you know, that maybe weren't familiar or were, oh, wow, forgot about that one, or just things that kind of jumped out at you as you were doing this? Was it somewhat of a learning experience while you were doing it, or did you know ahead of time?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I mean, one of the expressions that I couldn't believe was so prevalent was the phrase, "we need to have a conversation about." We did some searching on this in speeches and things, and it's something that, as we say in the book, that President Obama says all the time. It's a way for him and for any politician to sort of try to regain control and to basically say, you know, let's stop all this crosstalk and pay attention to what I'm saying. You know, so he said it after the Edward Snowden spying revelations. He said it after the legalization votes for marijuana in Colorado and Washington State. He said it a number of other times. John Boehner says it a lot too. That was just one example of something that, you know, you hear it a lot, you don't really think about it, and then you go, wow, that's really prevalent.
It also, as I'm sitting here thinking about it, as you're answering the question and talking about it, I guess now it's sort of, you know, when somebody says my good friend and you know, hey, turn around and look who's behind you. If we hear that, that's sort of a key to there's nothing going on.
Right.
I mean, we're not going to do anything. We need to have a conversation, but we're not going to.
Right.
If I just find some of these. Now, were there any of them that just left you scratching your head and laughing?
Oh, I mean, you know, some of the ones that are just, you know, patently untrue, like, you know, the all-time favorite one besides my good friend that everybody always cites is when someone is leaving a job and they don't want to give the real reason they're leaving, they say, I want to spend more time with my family. and that's of course, you know, and that's just so transparently, although we did actually cite a couple of examples. There was the former CIA director, whose name escapes me right now, but he said, I really do want to spend more time with my family, you know, but so often it's, you know, it's hauled out there. And it's not just in politics; it's trotted out there in the business world as well. Mm-hmm. You know, so I mean that's one of them. That's just one of many.
Yeah. Hey, I've met your family. No, you don't. Right. Now there is an anecdote in the book that you write about regarding legendary Speaker of the House Tip O'Neill. And if you would share that with us, I mean, whom he considered the real political enemy in Congress.
Right. Well, he supposedly once said to a colleague, remember, the House Republicans are merely the opposition. The Senate is the enemy. and that's in the context of we were using, how people in the House, if you'll ever watch C-SPAN, will never say the Senate. They'll just say the other body. Other body is just kind of that, that's that faraway place that we really don't understand, that we don't have any control over, but we have to refer to it somehow.
Those people.
Yeah. Right.
All right. Chuck McCutcheon, Washington journalist. The book that he co-wrote with David Mark is coming out sometime early fall.
September 1st.
September 1st. Okay. Dog whistles, walkbacks, and Washington handshakes. Decoding the jargon, slang, and bluster of American political speech. Fun stuff. Chuck, thank you so much for joining us. We look forward to speaking with you again here on americasdemocrats.org.
All right, thanks again.
All right, and this is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for Stand Up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Do you want to get involved and help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box? You can make your contribution to Democrats for America's Future and help us keep this show going and to elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for Stand Up Democrats. Anthropologist Janine Wedel takes a look at the tribal customs of Washington, where influence peddlers operate in the shadows of unaccountability. We'll talk to her about that in just a moment. Right now, we turn to Jim Hightower, America's #1 populist, for his common sense commentary.
I'm a dyed-in-the-wool, fourth-generation Texan, so let me just say that I am shocked and amazed, dazed and dismayed by the failure of my state's present collection of wimpo political leaders and police authorities to put Texas first. I'm referring to the fact that Texas, the machoest, most militaristic, cockiest, gun-totingest state in the Union, is not #1 in receiving surplus combat equipment from the Pentagon to militarize our police departments. One thing that most Americans learn from the ugly show of military might by police against the citizens of Ferguson, Missouri, is that the Department of Defense has quietly been arming our police departments to the teeth over the last couple of decades. M16 assault rifles, MRAP armored vehicles, Huey helicopters, grenade launchers, body armor, you name it. They've all been doled out like Santa Claus tossing candy to children in a Christmas parade. In mid-August, the New York Times ran a useful graphic of 6 maps of the U.S., each one showing the geographic distribution of particular kinds of weaponry and gear. That's how we Texans learned of our state's shameful performance in the Pentagon's grab-it-and-go giveaway. Texas was not in first place in any category, not one. In terms of the breadth of distribution across the state, we were even outgunned in the assault rifle category by liberal Massachusetts and La-La Land, California. And we were completely skunked in grenade launchers. Texas police didn't get a single one of those babies, but lefty Minnesota got several. Oh, the humiliation! This is Jim Hightower saying, so much for Rick Perry campaigning for president as a pistol-packing, locked-down-the-border Mr. Tough Guy. Chris Christie got more goodies for tiny New Jersey than Perry did for mighty Texas. Talk about an oops moment. This is scandalous.
Need an antidote to the progressive blues? Want some good news about how grassroots folks are rebelling against the corporate powers and winning? Well, here's an easy-to-swallow pill for you, the Hightower Lowdown. Hightower's monthly newsletter will give you the lowdown, even as it lifts you up. It's 4 pages a month, jam-packed with facts you can use, actions you can take, and Jim's own Texas humor, all for only $15 a year. To become a lowdowner, go to hightowerlowdown.org.
This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for Stand Up Democrats. Anthropologist Janine Wedel says the widespread loss of faith in institutions in America resembles Eastern Europe under late-stage communism. And we say hello to Janine Wedel, anthropologist who received her Ph.D. from the University of California, Berkeley. She's a professor at the School of Policy, Government, and International Affairs at George Mason University and the author of a new book, Unaccountable: How Elite Power Brokers Corrupt Our Finances, Freedom, and Security. Professor Janine Wedel, thank you so much for joining us today on americasdemocrats.org.
You're welcome. It's my pleasure.
Now, you write about the breakdown of policymaking from the point of view of an anthropologist. How do the tribes that live inside the Beltway differ from tribes of the South Pacific, for example? Are they more or less advanced?
Well, as anthropologists, we compare, to the extent that we compare societies, we focus on similarities and differences. And one of the comparisons that is really striking in my research and new book, Unaccountable, is the disturbing ways in which the United States is becoming reminiscent of Eastern Europe under communism. And I got my start as a social anthropologist really living and studying Poland under communism in the 1980s. So I have I've experienced this. But one of the things one of my major findings, and one of the things that I grapple with in the book is the fact that trust in institutions is really waning around the world, in institutions from the Catholic Church to, of course, the Congress, parliaments, governments, and so on. And this was a major feature of communist societies, and for good reason. People didn't believe what their leaders and institutions were telling them, and we're seeing this development now in the West. And our leaders in our institutions are often giving us good reason for this. Mm-hmm. And this leaves us open to another parallel, striking parallel, which is parity. So because we don't believe our institutions and leaders, we turn to parity. And real truth-telling is often done more in the form of parody or fake news, like Jon Stewart or Stephen Colbert, than it is in the media. Some people now get their daily events and perspectives from these fake news shows. Why is that? Because they convey more truth very often than the more sober media, and that's a striking parallel, strongly reminiscent of what was happening in at least some places in Eastern Europe under late communism, in Poland and certainly in the Soviet Union.
That's scary to think about. The theme of your book is corruption, but you say the most damaging kind is not the Bernie Madoff type, but a hidden, more subtle kind. What are some examples of what you refer to as the new corruption?
Well, if you think about, when we talk about corruption today, of course, one of the scandals that's corruption scandals that's hitting the news, and for its innumerable headlines about the former Virginia Governor Robert McDonnell and his wife, who are charged with bribery and fraud, alleged fraud and bribery. And that story, of course, has grabbed innumerable breathless headlines. But while these players may have broken the law, the question is, did they distort public policy in any meaningful way? And today's new corruption isn't going to be it's no longer the simple bribe. It's no longer activities that are clearly illegal, but they violate the public trust. If you think, for instance, of Goldman Sachs and its famous Abacus deal in the 2000s, 2007, in which it devised these investment vehicles for one of its clients without disclosing to other clients. Those other clients were pension funds, insurance companies, foreign banks. So without letting these other banks know that they were being set up to lose billions. And so when you think about it, the trust of the people who were investing in them were violated, because when you invest with a firm like that, you don't expect that they're going to knowingly sell you down the river to others of their clients.
Yeah.
Right. So that is a violation of public trust. It's not illegal. Right? It's not illegal. It's very subtle. It's difficult to detect. But is it not a problem? And one of the as one of the Goldman Sachs vice presidents, when he resigned, he wrote a piece in the New York Times on the day he resigned in 2012, and he said, I don't know of any illegal behavior, but will people push the envelope and pitch lucrative and complicated products to clients, even if they're not the simplest investments or the ones most directly aligned with the client's goals? Absolutely. Every day, in fact. Mm. So, ceremonially, we still attack the practitioners of the old corruption, but are we not dealing today with something that is more insidious and more damaging, much more damaging to our meaning the public's, our interests, starting with very basic interests like financial security?
Yeah, I mean, you're counting on these people because you don't know anything about it yourself. They're experts supposedly, and they're there to help you, they say. Right. And look what we end up with. Right. We're speaking with Janine Wedel, professor in the School of Policy, Government, and International Affairs at George Mason University, and talking about her new book, Unaccountable: How Elite Power Brokers Corrupt Our Finances, Freedom, and Security. You describe the emergence of shadow lobbyists and high priests of the economy. Who are they?
Well, so let's start with the shadow lobbyists. So shadow lobbyists are often former government, former high-level government officials or congressional leaders or staff members, people who have occupied positions where they have access to in fact, worthy access themselves, and are now on the outside and are involved in peddling influence, but do not register as lobbyists as they're required to do under U.S. law and many other countries as well. So an example would be former Senate Majority Leader Tom Daschle, who helped shape President Obama's signature legislation on health care reform, at the very same time that he was consulting for healthcare firms on those same issues. So the question, why is this a problem? Well, the problem for us, the public, is that how can we know what was really going on? What was his agenda while he was simultaneously working with the healthcare industry on the application of new information technologies and getting paid handsomely for it, while at the same time he was advising the White House, meeting with Obama and Vice President Biden, and with the new Senate Majority Leader to strategize on the Affordable Care Act, or now known as Obamacare. So how can we, the public, ever know? There's a real information problem that we have as influencing and governing has become so very much more dispersed in the world that we live in today. So that's one example. Then we have very much lesser known people like Elizabeth Obagi, who a year ago was the taste du jour. She wrote a piece in the Wall Street Journal that called her a senior analyst at the Institute for the Study of War, so at a think tank. And soon she was advocating very strongly U.S. military intervention in Syria when she wrote this piece on the Wall Street Journal, and very soon that propelled her to other news outlets. She was appearing on media outlets as diverse as Fox News and NPR's Morning Edition. And both John Kerry and John McCain, so both Republicans and Democrats, cited her work during congressional hearings in their push to intervene in Syria. But then it turned out that she had a contract with a pro-rebel Syrian group, which itself had contracts with the U.S. and British governments to aid the Syrian opposition. So then it turned out that she had undisclosed affiliations, which might have impaired her alleged or her supposed impartiality. In other words, she was being presented as an expert, as an impartial expert. I call them as I see them, where she had other agendas that were not fully disclosed, and that's what shadow lobbyists, that's what shadow lobbying is about, and therein lies the problem for the public and the potential violation of public trust. That these people are appearing on TV. And they may be presented as, former chief of Homeland Security, as, say, Michael Chertoff was when he was advocating those full-body scanners a few years ago on TV. And only later did the public learn that he, at the time, owned or was the head of the firm by his name that had the only license to manufacture those full-body scanners, right? So again, we didn't know that he had another agenda, another potential agenda. We thought when we were watching him that he was giving us his best independent, his best expertise.
Right.
And that's the problem and potential violation of public trust.
I mean, what else would you think, right? I mean, when it's presented to you like that. Now, a lot of us might also be surprised that some of the bad guys among the unaccountable power elites are universities, think tanks, and other nonprofit organizations, as you relayed to us just there on some of these. How do they benefit from secrecy and lack of accountability?
Well, so here's the fundamental problem. So universities and think tanks and nonprofits have this neutral, impartial veneer, reputation, right? We want to talk to a university professor or a think tanker because we believe that person has some expertise, has some knowledge that is not tainted by having a dog in that fight. Yeah. Right? Mm-hmm. Okay. And so what's happening increasingly as all institutions are under pressure and people are under pressure to make money and so on, what's happening is that people are using those reputational benefits of being associated with a university or with a think tank, when in fact there may well be another agenda. So, case in point, economists who testified, academic economists who testified about the financial crisis on before congressional and sub-congressional committees, and congressional and sub-congressional committees and subcommittees, I should say, without disclosing that in addition to being academics, they were also working for investment banks who indeed had a very strong interest in how that legislation that they were testifying on would come out. A study that came out a few years ago at the University of Massachusetts, Amherst, examined the activities of 19 mostly prestigious academic financial economists who were linked to both public and international institutions, and who belonged to two groups that put forth proposals on financial, public proposals on financial reforms. And what they found was that out of these 19 very prominent economists, all of whom gave expert advice to the media and to the public about financial reform, they found that, quote, the vast majority of the time they did not identify their financial affiliations and possible conflicts of interest, and that was also true when they published their work in academic journals. So, again, the issue is how do we, the public, know that we're getting this impartial expertise? We have an information problem, and this has become epidemic in our age.
It seems like we can't trust anybody. I mean, you're talking about all the way across.
And unfortunately, that then what that is reflected, as I think I said at the beginning, that is reflected in public opinion polls. That people are less and less trusting of institutions and leaders, and unfortunately, the institutions and the leaders give us more and more reason for this lack of trust. But then we tend to also trust one of the problems that arises from this lack of trust is that we tend to trust then just whatever is in the private realm, and so the people who want to game us dress up all manner of efforts as being private. So that's why there are, lots of what might be called fake grassroots organizations, or so-called non-profits that are really funded by billionaires with an agenda.
Right.
So we're easily gamed in that regard because we're so distrusting of the public arena and government that we turn to these private endeavors, which may be everything but which may be private, but they're certainly not without an agenda.
Sure. Well, and you name some pretty powerful names as unaccountable leaders who mix business, philanthropy, and policymaking. Tony Blair, Peter Orszag, Gerhard Schroeder, Bill Clinton. Are you saying that these people have no interest in improving the world, or just that they need to be open about their real motives?
No, I'm not. I'm not saying they have no interest. I think what we're seeing now is we're seeing a new model where business and philanthropy are very much mixed, and we need to be able to and sometimes policy are very much mixed together. I mean, it's certainly in the case of Tony Blair, well, how many different affiliations can you have? I mean, on the very day he resigned from office, he became the special envoy to the so-called Quartet on the Middle East that's made up of the United States, the European Union, the United Nations, and Russia. But, that wasn't the only role he would quickly assume. I mean, the British paper, The Telegraph, dubs him Blair Incorporated. So there's the African Governance Initiative, there's the Tony Blair Faith Foundation, the Tony Blair Sports Foundation, the initiative called Breaking the Climate, Deadlock, and then there's Tony Blair Associates that advises the Middle East governments, Kuwait, but then also Kazakhstan. So, at the same time, he was an advisor to the insurance giant, Zurich International, and J.P. Morgan Chase. This has brought him many millions of dollars and intense scrutiny over his visits to Libya, which a few of them were apparently paid for by Muammar Gaddafi. So, Blair has insisted he doesn't lobby on behalf of J.P. Morgan Chase, But at the very least, J.P. Morgan Chase is going to use the Blair brand.
Yep, absolutely.
I mean, why are they paying him a 7-figure? They're not idiots, presumably.
Right.
And as the National Interest wrote, they said J.P. Morgan apparently invoked his name during the negotiations for the unsuccessful Libya-Russia deal. So
we need transparency. I mean, that's the bottom line.
Well, and we're not going to get it with these, with these sorts of arrangements. And some of Blair's management companies are organized as liability partnerships, and as the Telegraph writes, Blair doesn't have any legal obligation to publish accounts. So again, where's the transparency going to come from?
It doesn't sound like we're going to get
right.
it.
I mean, and in the case of Bill Clinton, whatever good works his foundation may do, some of the people who are engaged in that are also there's overlap between that and the business endeavors, and the question always is then where does one begin and the other, where does one end and the other and the other begin? And again, how we the public really have very little way of figuring that out. Or think about Gerhard Schroeder and think about what's going on in Ukraine right now with the Russians waging a massive new style warfare replete with propaganda, disinformation, truthiness, and masking it and trying to cover up and mask what their true efforts are.
Mm-hmm.
And think about Gerhard Schroeder, who after leaving office as Germany's head of state, and negotiating with Gazprom, the Russian-owned energy giant, negotiating a deal favorable to Gazprom, and by many German accounts not so favorable to Germany, goes directly to work for Gazprom, right?
Well, it just keeps on going and going.
Right. So and think about what that portends for even Germany's national interest, if you think about it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
now, clearly something has to be done. I don't know what the answer is, but, starting with transparency, how you get it, do we need new rules, regulations to keep this type of thing from happening? I don't know, but, this is, it's certainly not helping us.
Well, the problem with regulations is that people always figure, I mean, regulations have their place, but they have to be very smart. Just any old regulation is not better than than not having a regulation. And they have to be able to anticipate how people are going to react to them, because people always will respond and find ways around. So regulation is can play a role, but it has to be very smart, and it has to not be worse, certainly, than no regulation at all. Yeah.
Janine Wedel, professor at the School of Policy, Government, and International Affairs at George Mason University, joining us today on americasdemocrats.org, talking about her new book, Unaccountable: How Elite Power Brokers Corrupt Our Finances, Freedom, and Security. Professor, thank you so much for your time with us today. We appreciate it, and we look forward to doing it again soon.
Thank you so much.
All right.
Nice to be with you.
Nice to be with you, too. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Help get our party back to its roots and to success at the ballot box. Make your contribution to Democrats for America's Future to keep this show on the air and help elect stand-up Democrats. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. This is americasdemocrats.org, the weekly netcast for stand-up Democrats. And now Bill Press and his guest, Christina Bellantoni, editor of Roll Call.
Labor Day's over, and so people are starting to think about, hey, there's some midterm elections going on. How about it? Roll Call is all over all of the above. The editor-in-chief, if you will, please, of Roll Call, give her this respect that she is due, Christina Bellantoni, in studio with us this morning. Christina, good to see you.
Good morning, Bill.
I mean, Roll Call, you just had the summer off, right?
Please. We actually, summer's a busy time for us because we send reporters out on the road to cover these midterm elections. So we had reporters, and I think it ended up being 12 states. We had 17 different datelines over the course of August because we don't print a newspaper for the last 2 weeks while Congress is in recess, but we do continue to publish online, really extensively. And then we're also doing the 50 Richest Members of Congress project that's going to go live on Monday, where we physically data enter all 541 senators, members, and delegates and put in all of their financial disclosures to give people a semi-accurate picture of their finances because that's not a really clear system.
I look forward to that. That's coming up Monday?
Yeah.
And that's, like the United States Senate is really the millionaires club, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Mostly senators that are at the top 50, but we rank all 541. So there are people, you can see like the younger, generally more progressive members of the House, for House Democrats, a lot of them have basically nothing but liabilities, very few assets. And then the way that they are forced to give these ranges, someone could have anywhere between 50 million and $150 billion. You would never know. So Jay Rockefeller is actually not the number one most rich person, except he probably is, right? Because he's got these family trusts that probably have billions of dollars in them, but they don't have to disclose that. So we start with the lowest range, subtract liabilities, and that's the number that we use.
Senator Feinstein's still the wealthiest member of the Senate, wasn't she?
She's not. But she's on the list.
She's
What's going to happen now that John Kerry's not in the Senate anymore? He used to be like...
Yeah, he was number one for quite a while. And that's also interesting because many people are rich because of their spouse.
Sure.
So Mike McCall, he's not number one this year, but he's going to be at the top of the list. He is rich because of his spouse. A lot of other people have acquired their assets. Shelley Pingree from Maine, for example, because of who they're married to.
Now, how is it that some people come to Washington with nothing? And they serve here for 20 years, and then suddenly they're millionaires. They don't make that much money.
So a lot of this, there's nothing nefarious about having smart mutual fund investments, right? And people continue to build a lot toward that. A lot of it is family trusts, but some of it is assets. And the way that the disclosures work, they don't have to say, yes, I own a $7 million home on East Capitol Street. If you're, for example, a senator who's in a tough re-election battle, you don't actually have to disclose that. You have to disclose the size of your mortgage. Well, if you don't have one, you're never even going to know about that house. You don't have to disclose the size of your personal residence back home either. So that is, it's very opaque, and that's something that we try to shed some light on as much as we can by reading through these disclosures and really putting them in context.
To me, the best example of what's wrong with this whole system we saw yesterday when it was announced that Eric Cantor is going to work for a Wall Street firm. Wall Street firm, right? Whatever it is. Yeah. He has zero experience in finance or banking or any of that. He's going to work with this firm, and he's making $2 million a year, and he gets $1.5 million for just signing up with them.
Not to mention he'll have a congressional pension for the rest of his life.
I don't have a congressional
By
pension.
the way, I have no experience either, and I do that job for $1 million. I just want to put that out there.
That's very generous.
Undercut him a little bit.
Yeah. But, it's the revolving door, isn't it?
Well, it's about connections.
Yeah.
And everybody knows that, you might not be able to get the deal signed if you're a former member of Congress, but you're going to be able to make the introduction or make sure the email gets read.
He won't even get it signed. He won't even understand what it's all about. But you're right. It's making the phone call that says, would you be willing to meet with my business associates, right? And to discuss this legislation or something like that.
Yeah.
I know. Yeah, and as I pointed out yesterday, and the New York Times points out this morning, it's not that he changed jobs. He's to continue to do the same job,
right?
Working for Wall Street. He's just getting paid more.
Well,
my comment, you don't have to join in there. After all, she is editor-in-chief of Roll Call. You mentioned that you have had people out in the field covering these midterm elections. You're back with some interesting findings. Let's start with the most important agenda, most people believe, in these midterm elections is control of the United States Senate.
Right.
You have identified the 10 most vulnerable senators. 9 out of 10 are Democrats.
That's right. So what we do, we're ranking them for the first time. So once a month, we're going out there and doing this. And there is actually a little bit of movement on this month's list. So last month, John Walsh from Montana was at the top. And we don't look at open seats here. These are people who are serving in the Senate who are vulnerable.
Who are running for re-election.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
And so there's 10. Sometimes there aren't 10, right? So we're doing this in order. So the person who's number 10 is probably not that vulnerable when you think about 33 people are up for re-election. A lot of people are in safe seats.
I didn't see John Walsh on the list at all this time.
So John Walsh was number 1, but he said he was not going to run for the seat after the whole plagiarism scandal.
Oh, that's right.
So this is now a seat that is very likely to flip to the Republicans. And so that's totally off the list. So moving up on the list is not who everybody thinks it might be. A lot of people are saying Mark Pryor in Arkansas is the most vulnerable senator. We're actually saying
Kay Hagan.
We're actually saying that it's Mary Landrieu.
Mary Landrieu.
So she's in a state that Mitt Romney won by, it's either 12 or 17 points. I think it's 12. That's a big margin. I actually am a little more bullish on her chances than our collective political team on that, just because her family is so tied into the state. But this recent thing with
and just
her
because
home
she's
being,
a really fierce campaigner.
Sure. She's faced tough elections before. She's also a chairman. She can say a lot that she's done for her home state. But the recent issue with saying that she basically lives in Washington and a series of really brutal ads based on those reports is not helping her. So this is a tough race. She's up against Bill Cassidy, who's from northern Louisiana. And so we're making that number 1. And then Mark Pryor is on that list. Kay Hagan from North Carolina is on that list.
Mark Pryor, number 2. He's been up in the polls, but not by much.
Right.
But
the thing that is interesting about Arkansas is a lot of people think about Mark Pryor's dad, David Pryor. They like him a lot. He's using David Pryor in ads. But you've also got Tom Cotton, who's this young, not that experienced politically person that a lot of people don't necessarily warm up to. They don't love Mark Pryor either, but they're not feeling it with Tom Cotton. He's not like the most gregarious or interesting candidate. So they're pretty much neck and neck. That's going to be a race that comes down to turnout, and I'm going to expect to see the Clintons spend a lot of time in Arkansas.
Number 3, Mark Begish from Alaska.
Yeah. So this is another state that is not a Barack Obama-friendly state. The Republicans got the candidate they wanted there. They could have had the whole repeat of the Lisa Murkowski nightmare a couple years ago. Joe Miller was looking strong for a while, but they got this guy, Dan Sullivan, who is got state experience. He's well-known statewide, and they're going to run neck and neck probably with a lot of money.
Saying, right?
Sure.
Yeah.
They're going to spend a lot of money on this race. And in general, incumbency helps, but it's he's a freshman. It's a 50-50 race probably till the end. And by the way, it takes them a long time to count votes in Alaska. So we might still be waiting because Louisiana, their first election is actually a jungle primary, so we could wait till December for that result, and we could wait for them to count votes in Alaska.
Jungle primary, so if nobody wins it outright or gets what?
It's 50. You have to get more than 50%. So it'll go to a runoff between the two main candidates.
Man. Yeah, and Mary Landrieu's been in that situation before, I think. And then we get to Kay Hagan in North Carolina.
Yeah, so North Carolina is an interesting state. I consider it similar to Virginia because of its demographic shifts. It's getting younger. It's getting more diverse. It's getting a little bit more liberal. Yet, in 2010, it was one of the states most affected by the Tea Party wave. You saw Democrats lose their seats. You saw a lot of retirements, and you saw the state house turn over. But there's a bit of a backlash from that. The actual voters in North Carolina are frustrated with Republicans by name ID right now. So that could help Kay Hagan. She has been critical of the president. He was just there giving a speech about his veterans policy, and she was saying you haven't done enough, like you need to step up. This is a very veteran-heavy state. But Tom Tillis is the state speaker. He's got a long record. There's a ton of money in the state. It's not that expensive to advertise. So this is yet another really close contest till the end.
She's run a good campaign, too. Yeah,
some people think that. Yeah,
right.
Yeah. She's been out there pretty talking to a lot of voters, not necessarily talking to us.
I was surprised to see on your list Al Franken and Mark Warner.
Sure.
I mean, from what I know, I just saw an article this morning in the Washington Post that Ed Gillespie's 25 points behind Mark Warner.
Which is why, if you read what it says, we say that this is only for the sake of there's no one else, because John Walsh moved up the list. He's the 10th most vulnerable senator.
Yeah.
He's only going to lose if there's some massive thing thing that becomes a Republican wave. Mark Warner remains very popular. He has plenty of money. Ed Gillespie is not really considered a deep, entrenched political campaigner there. I mean, really, what a lot of people in Virginia believe is that he's setting up a run for governor one day, Ed Gillespie.
Right. And same with Al Frank, and not that margin, but from everything I've seen, Al...
The Republicans like their candidate against him,
Yeah.
And they do feel like perhaps they have a chance, but it's only if there's a wave. That's why he's at the bottom.
He's kept his head down. He's not been a show horse. He's been, Al Franken, I think, a workhorse in the Senate. People generally, the people that I've talked to, that he's in pretty good shape.
Right.
Yeah. Do you agree with that? The one Republican on the list.
Mitch McConnell. Yeah. So
from your lips to God's ears.
It's hilarious to me that the Democrats are so confident in this state. Now, they're not saying they're going to win, but they really think they have a strong chance there. And that, again, stems from the Clintons. Bill Clinton identified Allison Lundergan Grimes a long time ago, saying she is an up-and-coming Democrat. Mm-hmm. Let's make sure she's the candidate. You remember he imploded Ashley Judd's chances there. And she's still running strong against McConnell, who is incredibly unpopular back home. Now, Harry Reid faced the same problem and ended up having a candidate who was just not going to win. And so he barely squeaked by, really lucked out in 2010, given the weight, given everything else. Is Mitch McConnell going to be so lucky? I think so. I mean, this is Kentucky. This is not a Democratic state. Barack Obama is deeply unpopular. But if it ends up being close and the money is going to continue to be really intense there, and if she continues to be a good candidate, the Democrats have a fighting chance.
It's true. Barack Obama is incredibly unpopular in Kentucky. The one person who is more unpopular is
Mitch McConnell.
Mitch McConnell.
Sure is.
I love when Allison Lundergan Grimes says, I'm only 35, but that's Mitch McConnell's approval rating, too. 35%.
The interesting thing about this is Mitch McConnell could lose, and the Republicans could still win the Senate. Like, there is a pathway to that on November 4th. So then what? You have John Cornyn, majority leader? I mean, it's going to be a free-for-all.
Yeah. And then 435 members of the House up for re-election. Christina Bellantoni is the editor-in-chief of Roll Call. The newspaper covers everything going on at the Hill and at the White House, and you can follow them at rollcall.com. Christina, the big news of the day is that there is the first Dunkin' Donuts ever established in Los Angeles, just made its appearance. Peter has been tracking this story.
Yeah, I mentioned this earlier.
He's trying to talk us into sending him out there, right?
For a field report.
You got to go to the ground, right? You got to make sure. Yeah. So here's the deal, because you asked where it was.
I want to know where in LA.
I just knew it was.
I mean, is East LA? Is it Brentwood? Area. Is it West Hollywood?
All right.
Beverly Hills?
So it's Santa Monica. It's Santa Monica.
The better part of LA.
So yeah,
that's pretty good. Yeah. What do you mean technically?
Well, no, I mean, I was giving you the where it is. 12th and Wilshire Boulevard. 12th Street and Wilshire Boulevard.
All right. I know right where it is.
Here's the thing, though. A donut is not a donut, right? Like, the air where you make the donut affects how the donut tastes.
It's like bagels in New York.
And sourdough bread in San Francisco.
Exactly.
They'll do a good job.
But you know what? Like, L.A. already has such a donut culture. You could probably throw a rock and hit better donuts than the Dunkin' Donuts ones.
The one that's always getting destroyed in the movies, right?
That's the one, yeah, the big donut.
I don't like
that
donuts.
Big one is not far from there, but actually.
Okay.
All right, before we get into some of the...
You didn't like donuts?
I did. Nobody noticed. Yeah.
I noticed. We all noticed.
I'm with you. Headline this morning, Congress on track to be the worst ever at passing laws. Now, the number of bills is not necessarily the measure of a good Congress or a bad Congress.
This is true.
Right, but still, this Congress is...
And this is the impression Americans have, regardless of whether it's a good Congress or bad Congress. Americans feel like Congress isn't doing anything, feels like it's out of touch with them, doesn't understand their needs, and actually comes to Washington and doesn't do anything. So that's a problem.
All of which is true.
Well, it's a problem for the midterms, but it's not actually going to change a whole lot of things for the midterms. So one thing that I would say when you talk to lawmakers about that number, they say, one, people don't understand how difficult it is because you've got a divided government, blah, blah, blah. House Republicans have this entire campaign ready to go called Stuck in the Senate, where they are going to demonize Harry Reid even more than they already do and showcase all of the bills that they've already passed that are just sitting there in the Senate. So that will help them towards trying to make Mitch McConnell that majority leader, of course. But when you talk to them about the actual laws that got passed, they avoided massive calamity. They had this government shutdown and then figured it out. And then they actually passed a compromised budget. Now, of course, a lot of people don't understand that compromised budget is about to run out and we're going to have to do another continuing resolution. And there's this showdown over immigration that's happening. So this is why I love my job so much.
So the bottom line is, even though it may be the most do-nothing, right, or the least productive Congress in the history of Congress, will this impact chance or improve Democrats' chances of taking leadership of the House this year?
Absolutely not. No. In fact, their chances are pretty bad of anything.
They'd have to win
17.
17, that's right.
And Republicans think they're standing to gain 5 to 6 seats on their end. I was at an event now more than a year ago, or it was about a year ago, down in Charlottesville with Larry Sabato, and at the time the shutdown had just ended. So it was I guess November 1st, something like that. And I predicted that the Democrats would gain some seats, and I know that's on record somewhere, and I'm saying it again now. And I was wrong at the time. That's what it looked like, but it is actually not going to happen.
All right, Christina, thanks so much for coming in this morning. It's great to get up to date on the Congress and the Senate and the House, and 2 months to go. It's going to be a rock and roll time for the next couple of months. Exactly.
Thanks.
Again, it's rollcall.com. Thanks, Christina.
That's all for americasdemocrats.org. Thank you to all who made today's show possible. Chuck McCutcheon, Janine Wedel, and the entire Bill Press team. And thank you for listening. If you liked what you heard, please get involved in our efforts to keep this show going and to elect Democrats who are bringing the party back to its roots. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate at the top of the page. And be sure to find 21st Century Democrats on Facebook. For americasdemocrats.org, I'm your host, Jim Cuddy. We want you to sit back and listen, but we need you to stand up and fight. Join us, support the show, and help elect Democrats who will stand up for democratic principles with your contribution today. Go to americasdemocrats.org and click on Donate.